Greetings, 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 greetings. I'm King Clifford Jefferson, ascendant of Godfrey, the fifth caravan Jew, son of folk rule of Jerusalem. I am the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, also known as the King of Peace or the King of Righteousness. It is July 24th, 2025, which is equivalent to the birth year 2975. I greet you in the name of King Edgar. I greet you in the name of all the kings of the Anglo-Saxons. I greet you in the name of all the Plantagenet kings who are our predecessors. I greet you in the name of my Queen Sister Godwin from House of Godwinson. I greet you in the name of my Archbishop Belmont from House of Belmont. I greet you in the name of all those who are trying to get understanding of what it is that we are here and called to do. Wait 1 second, I'm just charging the phone. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Once again, I want to give honor to all of you who are going to be joining me here today. This is definitely a lesson that is forthcoming. A lot of our brothers and sisters who are going to church or are part of religious societies, groups, etc. I think this is a lesson that you don't want to miss in regards to the one you call uh, your Savior, Jesus Christ, or whoever it is. You want to call the Lord, or the King of Kings. I think you really need to examine that phrase a little bit more in depth than you are doing in this day. All right. So that's what we're going to talk about today, due to the fact that none have done this. Um, I don't think you're ever going to hear a lesson like this before, being that it's going to be concrete. I'm going to prove everything that I say. It's not going to be based upon belief, faith, or some type of fruition. It's based upon the law. The law is the law. Okay. Once again, I always have a thumbnail I'm going to play in regards to the title of this lesson, Who Has the Divine Right of Kings? And we'll go to the scripture for that, Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 19. Once again, the title to this lecture is Who Has the Divine Right of Kings? According to Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 19. Who has done the work to deserve the right to be called the divine right of kings, meaning divinely inspired by a king, or to do the work of God as a king, or Lord of the king, or King of the kings. This is what we're going to fully examine today. Okay, we're going to go through not the scripture, but we're going to go through the kings who wrote the Bible. We're going to go through their ancestry. We're going to go through the time era and examine in close detail the term divine right of kings. Okay, and we're going to uh, give a narrative based upon everything that has been brought forth by the Third Typical English Church of England, because it's in reality it's all in regards to preserving God's church, God's children, okay, here on God's earth, all right, which is his throne, okay? So the one who has the divine right to be called the King of Kings or the Lords of Lords is the one who's given the authority, all right, by divine inspiration to sit on the throne of God. When we say the throne of God, we're talking about earth, okay? The ruler of the earth, the ruler of the land, okay? Whatever land you're talking about, a lot of land have kings, rulers, etc., who rule the land, who had subjects. So we need to examine that in our present day and be able to trace that back to the biblical or 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 for lack of a better term, mythical understanding, which majority of the people here have. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started with this beautiful lesson. Who has the divine right of kings? We're going to go to scripture, Deuteronomy 17, verse 8 to 19. You know, Deuteronomy has to deal with the inheritance for the children of Israel who are the true children of Israel, based upon the inheritance that was going to be conveyed to not just the children, or i.e., the heirs, or based upon the inheritance, but based upon who was to convey the inheritance to them. And that was supposed to be the Lord of Lord, or the King of King, or that image, or that figure, or that entity that you call the Christ figure. Okay, so let's get started. Any questions? Please ask them in the chat line as well as in the uh, on the uh, on the post, as well as like, share, subscribe, donate, free and comment so if you have it. But once again, let's get started with this marvelous lesson. I promise I won't hold you long either. Okay, keep these names on your dial plate, David. All right, keep these names on your dial plate. When you hear them from the biblical perspective, and when we say biblical perspective, we know we're talking about the Bible. You know, the Bible is written by King James and many other narrative aspects of it, John Wycliffe and the rest of them. Okay, but these actual people who wrote these Bibles were actually kings. Okay, who ruled based upon the divine right of kings. Right, very important that we understand that.
Earthly retribution. He sinned due to his special to kill David. David refused to retaliate, saying, "May the Lord positions of authority over me at all."
We must understand what's being said to us in the abstract and the concrete. He said, render unto what Caesar to Caesar and render unto what God is God. When he said God, he meaning the church. When he say Caesar and taxation, you're talking about feudal law. Okay. Feudal law or feudalism originated from Roman law. Very, very important. All right. We also, as they said earlier about uh, Jesus himself, all right, was the one who was to come into his inheritance by being divinely inspired by God, by the divination. Okay, let's continue on.
Augustine had an early form of divine right. For all
Yeah, so he said Alpha the Great. Okay, Alpha the Great, who unified the so-called Berbers, which according to other people, they were called barbarians, okay, against the influences and the teachings of Charlemagne, our Frankish Roman king, which we're going to go through a little bit later on in this lecture, okay? But as you can see, they mentioned Charlemagne and they mentioned Alfred the Great, all taking a position as those who were spoken in your Bible based upon their right to be called by way of inspiration to the divine right of kings. We must understand what's being said and see it as it is in this day and time to recognize king. Let's continue. We mentioned Alfred the Great. He's going to mention Henry the Eighth. These are all the people we're going to talk about or discuss today based upon who took over God's kingdom. Okay? Very important. All this has to go all the way back into the history of God's law. Okay? God's law, according to the kings, was parliament. Okay? Parliament. All right. We know King James wrote the Bible. He was from a different parliament. This was the Parliament of Scotland. Okay. Alfred the Great was from the Parliament of Wittenberg. Okay. Wittenberg. He was the first king of the unified Anglo-Saxons, and they were in fact Berbers, okay, or what you call barbarians, which were a conflict with Vikings or Nordic, Scottish, Roman descendants, all right, who all invaded England, all right, and brought in the feudalism, feudal habits that we still see exist today. All right, let's continue. Act of supremacy.
Christian perspective. The theory strong.
Great job. Nice video, right? But let's go in depth to what the video spoke about. Because a lot of you have no clue as as what has been said before you. So let's examine what's been said based upon divine right of kings. Who has that right to be called a king by way of divine right? Okay. He mentioned two figures. He mentioned Alfred the Great and Charlemagne. Okay. So let's think about that real quick. Okay. Any questions, please post them. Let me know. The barbarian kingdoms were states founded by various non-Romans, primarily Germanic people in Western Europe and in North Africa following the collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century Christian era. The barbarian kingdoms were the principal governments in Western Europe and in the early Middle Ages. This time of barbarian kingdom is considered to have come to an end with Charlemagne's coronation as emperor in 800, though a handful of small Anglo-Saxon kingdoms persisted until being unified by Alfred the Great in 886. When you're talking about coronation, you're talking about an oath of allegiance and an oath of office to whatever position. And this position will happen to be the throne of God, which we call the crown. Okay? We see that Charlemagne and Alfred the Great are not of the same ancestry based upon their practices, customs, traditions, etc. All right? We can see that Anglo-Saxons were unified by Alfred the Great, and they were called barbarians, and he unified the barbarian world. Let's look up the word or the term barbarian before we go further, because a lot of people refer to the term or the phrase barbarian, but use it in a manner which is not befitting of people who are not barbarian. Okay, very important. So a barbarian is a person or a tribe of a people that is perceived to be primitive, savage, or warlike. It's perceived that way. Okay, only persons that can be seen to be primitive, savage, and warlike are invaders, conquerors, all right, squatters, and whatever term that you can think of in regards to taking possession of land by force. Okay, a land that was promised by God, okay, to the king and the king's subject, okay, not by force, not by prescription of sovereignty, not by eminent domain, but by conveyance, a process called livery of season, okay, very important. The word barbarian for us who are members of the English Stereotypical Church of England should be denoted to as described in Middle Eastern and North African terminology. Let's go to that. We're not Greek. We're not Scandinavian. We're not Celtics, nor are we Israelites. Okay, we're Anglo-Saxon Berbers. Okay, and Middle Eastern. Okay, right here. Berbers, Middle Eastern and North African. If you look at New Jersey Revised Statute 52 colon 4-6 and 7, the new data that's being collected based upon the geographical information relative to the so-called residents, they now classify as MENA, Middle East and North Africa. Look up New Jersey Bar Statute 52 colon 4-6 and 7. This is the identity of the people now classified in the prior classification as Negroes, blacks, colors. They are now classified as Middle Eastern North African. And if you look at the word barbarian, according to the term Middle Eastern North African, it says the native Berbers of North Africa were among the many people called barbarian Bahu, early Romans. The term continued to be used by medieval Arabs, see Berber etymology, before being replaced by what? The Amazigh. All right. In English, the term Berber continues to be used as an exonym. The geographical term Barbary or Barbary Coast and the name of Barbary Pirates based on that coast were also derived from it. Okay, so very important that the Berbers, i.e., the barbarians, which we are the Anglo-Saxon Berbers, going to the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, which defined Berbers as the ones who created the Parliament of England. At that time, it was called Witten or Wittemat, means the wise council. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, we're talking about divine right of kings, and the divine right of kings is based upon the king's allegiance and oath and affirmation to God's authority that is bestowed upon the king, which in return bestows lords. These are called landlords or tenants in chief or menace lords. Okay. Then in return convey property by way of what we call tenures or estates in land. Okay, this is what this is all about. So when we're dealing with the authority given by God to the king, based upon which at this time would be happen to be the children of Israelites, okay? Because everyone want to be the Israelites, but can't prove that in fact who they are. The Israelites are in fact the Anglo-Saxon burghers, okay? We're going to prove it today, all right? So let's get to the scripture because it said that the kings use scriptures to back up what they say. So let's look at it. Deuteronomy 17, verse 8. For all of you who speak Hebrew, you can look it up in your Hebrew Bible. And if you speak Hebrew, you can read it in Hebrew and see it says it the same thing as well. Okay. The reason why this verse is very important because it deals with um, how the conveyance of the land was supposed to be done based upon how God conveyed it to the king. Okay, which was the divine right of kings because King James was the king. Okay, he was the ruler of the British Empire. Okay, the British Empire was preceded by the English Empire. Okay, and you don't get to an empire until you start at the very beginning, which goes back into Alpha's Great Unification in 889. Okay, it says here, for all those who speak Hebrew or Israelites, whatever, it's Yiddish, whatever, you can read in your language, but it says this. If a case, we're talking about a court of law, when you read in your scriptures, you might read it as magistrates, doctors of the law, or ministers, or Levite priests. We're talking about judges, okay? All right. No matter if it's civil, criminal, equity, probate, this is what we're dealing with. All right. In the eyes of the English. Okay, because we read it in English. When I read it in Hebrew, when I read it in Spanish, when I read it in Bangladesh or any other language, we're reading it in English, and this is a conversation between our Lord who had a conversation with our God about the conveyance that was conveyed to our Lord, which is now our God, because kings were gods on earth. So it said, if a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, or matter to dispute in your courts, you should promptly prepare to the place that your God, Lord, will have chosen. All right. So the only place that will be fitting is what a court of law. Okay, a court of law. Very, very, very important. And when we say a court of law based upon what we're reading in Deuteronomy 7, 8 through 19, the same argument in the abstract is the same argument that I'm making in the court of law right now. Right now, is our argument for not just a partial estate, but the whole allodial state is right before the appellate court right now in the state of New Jersey in regards to quieting the title based upon lottery of season as a result of God conveyance of the land to a king. Okay? And then when the king gets it, being that the land is the rodeo, now he can now divvy out in what they call partial estate to his chosen. Okay? We only talk about his chosen. No one's going to be able to break this down like I'm doing it. Why? Because I am the fact, the king, by way of divine right. Let's see. And it appears before the Levitical priest or the magistrate in charge at that time and present your problem when they have announced to you the verdict in the case. Now, we're talking about due process of law, y'all. Let me read it again. If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you should promptly prepare to the place that your God Yahweh will have chosen. Right? Will have chosen and prepared before the Levitical priest or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem. All right. So it's talking about due process of law. Or petition a right to the king. Okay, everyone has a right to petition the king. All right, this is the prerogative of the king that now the prerogative is bestowed upon the king's subject when they seek redress. Okay, It says, when they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you should carry you should carry out the verdict that is announced to you from the place that Yahweh chose, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. So don't get upset when you go to court. That's what we do. We get upset when we go to court because we claiming that we're standing on God's rights, God's law, but we don't get favorable replies. So we just lash out, get all upset, you start yelling and etc. And they look at you like you don't know your own law because it's telling you when you got a quarrel or you got an argument or you have an issue, whether you're the plaintiff or the defendant, whether you're the appellate or the respondent, or whether you're the petitioner, go to the courts of law with your Lord and where your Lord's law is at, all right, and seek due process, all right. And if you don't get it in the lower courts, it's okay, all right. Don't lash out. Follow the due process of the law. They'll tell you got how many days to file an appeal. This is what you choose. Choose observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. Now watch what they say next. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left. That means that don't just give up. Just don't give up. All right. Keep straight heads, straight of course. All right. Stay the course. The same example, living example that I'm doing as the king. Stay in the course. Why? Because only the king can do that. I'm not saying it. Deuteronomy says it. Let's see. Should either party to the dispute act presumptuously and disregard the priest's charge with serving their God, Yahweh, or the magistrate, that party shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from Israel. We're talking about the children of Israel seeking due process of law and a court of law. You don't have that nowhere on the planet that because of your First Amendment right that you go to a court of law and seek due process of law on either injury that's brought before that court of law. Because why? It's God's court. If it's God's court, then it must be the king's court because God creates kings, which you call lords. Okay? Very important we understand it from the abstract to the concrete. If that makes sense to someone, please give me a thumbs up. If that makes sense, please give me a thumbs up in the chat line. All the people were here and be afraid and will not act presumptuously again. Now, I can clearly say that because of my past two prior court. Uh, I blew the court out of pocket. I blew the court out of pocket. I got a second degree offense that carried 5 to 10 years and got it dismissed with $125 parking fine, which I'm appealing that. Why? Because this is the course that I must stay on. They didn't say agree with it because the plea bargain was invalid because that was not the court to prove that what they charged me was in violation of law. All right. This is dealing with the property in question, the property that God gave to the king to convey to his heirs by way of the law called in library of season. Okay. I'm being charged on the defamation per se as a result of me acting in my tenure. Okay. As a king. How I know it, Deuteronomy says it. Okay. So I didn't get upset. I stayed the course. I went from the lowest court to the highest court. All right. And this is it, brothers and sisters. We there. All right. Because I'm going to show you by the end of this lesson, you will see that we're there. I am your Lord and Savior. Let's see. And as after you have entered the land that your God has assigned to you, and let me make sure I didn't miss nothing. All right. Here we go. After you have entered the land that your God has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide. And I will set a king over me, as do all nations about me. Once again, I repeat, I will say if after you have entered the land that your God, we got a lot of gods up there, all right? And we're talking about a land that you enter, okay? That God promised you, not the land that you claim you come from as a result of people invading the land. When you look at the laws governing the children of Israel, which we're going to discuss today, this is the land that God promised his children. And the only way the land can be conveyed to his children is by having a king. But the people didn't choose the king because they chose not to have one. Okay? They chose not to have one. So God set one up for you. How I know it? Let's prove it. If after you have entered the land that your God, Yahweh, has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, and I will set a king over me as do all nations about me. You should be free to set a king over yourselves, one chosen by God, Yahweh. Be sure, though, to set as king over yourself one of your own people. I repeat, be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kin. Did y'all hear what I just said? Did you hear what I said? You must not put someone over you that is not your kindred. He is a foreigner. He don't know your laws. He don't know your customs. He don't know how your court works. He don't know how your due process system works. Why you think you don't get due process? When I start using the laws that I'm telling you now, based upon me being the king and law and what Jesus said, uh, um, what did he say? Uh, he says, uh, he said, when to see the procedures and to what God's got, but it was something else he said about the courts of law. Something he said, it'll come to my mind in a second. All right, let's continue. So it says, you shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by your God, Yahweh. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kin. Moreover, he should not keep my horse. Moreover, he should not keep my horses or send my people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since he warned you. You must not go back that way again. So all y'all talking about going back to Israel and going back to Africa, look what's going on over there right now. You're being warned. You are already home. You're in the promised land. You just have not received the promise because you broke your promise to the one who gave you the promise. Okay? Very important that you understand what God is saying to you. All right, we can leave that there. Let's look at it from the King James version now. Eight, if cases come before your courts that are too difficult for you to judge, whether bloodshed, lawsuit, or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Go to the Levitical priest and to the judge who is in the office at that time. Inquire of them, and they will give you the verdict. You must act according to the decisions they give you at the place the Lord will choose. Don't you go into a courtroom? Ain't there a Bible there? Isn't there a Bible in the courtroom? They're so bold with it now, they don't even have a Bible in the courtroom. Why? Because they know what? You ain't God's children. All right? Be careful to do everything they instruct you to do. Act according to whatever they teach you. See, they're teaching you, and the decisions they give you, they have to give you a remedy. It might not be the remedy you want, but they give you a remedy. All right? Do not turn aside from what they tell you to the right or to the left. Anyone who shows contempt for the judge or for the priest who stands ministering there to the Lord your God is to be put to death. You must purge the evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid and will not be contentious again. If you understand this, then you understand that I am in fact your king, according to Deuteronomy 8 through 13. Now we're on 14 of Deuteronomy. King, the king, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of the Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you are not to go back that way. He must not take You must not take many wives of his heart and will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver or gold or etc. This is instructions given from our God, okay, to his lords, okay? Very important to understand that because now we read it in the scripture. Basically, we see the divine rights that the king were bestowed by God, okay, and the law that God gave to be administered was the law to be administered in what? The courts of law, okay, of law. We all need to study English common law because if you don't, right, so let's get with it. Now here comes the good part. So we discuss Alfred the Great, we discuss Charlemagne, we discuss Henry VII, okay, and every other monarch. All this involves what we call oath of allegiance, okay? An oath of allegiance to follow instructions, okay? To follow instructions. Very important, all right? Are you following the instructions? What instructions? The Constitution, all right? And Lord, what we just read, let's go to the Constitution because it said, and I repeat, when you enter the land of the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settle in it, and you say, let us say, a king over us like all other nations around us, be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses. Not somebody else God chooses, but the Lord your God chooses. He must be from amongst your fellow Israelites or the children of God. Okay? Do not place a foreigner over you, one who are not an Israelite. Okay? So let everybody claim to be Israelite and following the God of the Israelites. Okay? So you must make a distinction who are the Israelites and who are the Israelites gods, okay? Because we're talking about some type of conveyance of land from God to the Israelites to be conveyed by a king. We don't see that happening nowhere, abstract or concrete, all right? But we see the demonstration happening right now in New Jersey in a court of law, okay? Based upon the instruction we read in chapter 17, verses 8 through 18, okay? With that, we'll move forward with this beautiful lesson. Okay. Let's look at it. Divine right of kings, based upon what we already examined. Let's do our own footwork now. The divine right of kings, divine right or God's mandation is a political, hear that key word, political. None of the movements right now, any religious society is not rooted in politics. Hear that? It's not rooted in politics. It's rooted in religion, but not politics. So God is nowhere in the picture because God law is a law that stands up in the court, as we read in Deuteronomy 17 through 18. Okay? So if God's laws don't work in the courts, 9 to matter 10, that ain't God's. All right? The doctrine asserts that monarchs is not accountable to any earthly authority, such as parliament or pope, because their rights to rule is derived from divine authority. Okay, we see it in the Bible, so you can't say I'm lying. Thus, the monarch is not subject to the will of the people, of the aristocracy, or any other estate of the realm. Now, I just said, make sure you choose a God that's of your kindred, because if it's not the God of your kindred, 9 to 10, that king ain't gonna treat you right. We see this demonstration in the at the time of what we call the Revolutionary War. Okay, there were prior demonstrations of the same type of revolution, i.e., overthrow, all right, as a result of non allegiance to the king or non allegiance to the law, okay, or non allegiance to the scripture. We must understand this in its entirety because we're talking about kings. Henry VIII, Louis the 14th. Okay, these are on later. These come out, they come back later. They went back as far as Alfred the Great. Okay, very important to comprehend what I'm saying. Let's go to history. Matter of fact, no, let's not do that. Let's go ahead now. Divine right of kings, we know the divine right of kings denotes to a coronation. We know when king become king, they go through a coronation ceremony. We see it today. You see it in the Roman Catholic Church. You see it in the British political regalia. You see it in uh, the formal ceremony for electing presidency or whatever the case may be. All right. But you don't see the example of the coronation ceremony based upon the origin where it stemmed from. Because everyone got their own ceremony based upon coronation, based upon their right as to be divinely inspired by God. You see it in all nations, Japan, Egypt, etc. All right. But we can't use the ones in Egypt because it just said don't go back to Egypt. So we have to find someone who speaks the language in the land we're in today. Right? Very important. Coronation, key point. Coronation. What is coronation? Proper coronation is not by man. The coronation is by God. Because God makes king. King man don't make king. God makes king. That's why the office of a king is an office. All right? It's a corporation soul. All right? The coronation of the monarchs of United Kingdom is an initiation ceremony in which they are formally invested with the jury regalia and crowned at Westminster Abbey. It corresponds to the coronation that the formerly took place in other European monarchies, which have all abandoned coronation in favor of inauguration or enthronement ceremonies. Did you hear that? A coronation is a symbolic formality and does not signify the official beginning of the monarch's reign, whether that reign be de jure or de facto. Okay? Talking about gods on earth, y'all. Let's go to the origin. History of it. The English coronation were traditionally held at Westminster Abbey with the monarch seated on a coronation chair. We go into the coronation chair. This is called the chair of Edward the Confessor or the chair of Edward the First, also called the stone of scone, okay, or the coronation stone, okay. This all goes back to the history that you have forgotten. English coronation were traditionally held at Westminster Abbey, where the monarch seated on a coronation chair. Main elements of the coronation services in the earliest form of oath can be traced to the ceremony devised by St. Dunstan for King Edgar coronation in 973. Okay? 973. The first coronation that we respect, as far as us being the English people. If you're not English, then this coronation ceremony or the origin of the ceremony when we founded it does not fit your script. Okay? So we see that King Edgar, based upon the coronation oath for the divine right of kings from God here on earth, goes back to King Edgar at Bath Abbey. It drew on ceremonies used by some kings of France and those used in ordination of bishop. So Franks had a coronation ceremony. Scottish had ceremonial um, coronation ceremony, as well as every other nation had a coronation ceremonial. Okay, so two versions of coronation services known as ordine, from Latin ordo meaning order or recensions, survived from before the Norman conquest. It is not known if the first recension was ever used in England. It was the second recension which was used by Edgar in 973 and by subsequent Anglo-Saxon and early Norman kings. Did you hear that? By subsequent Anglo-Saxon and early Norman kings. Very, 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 very important based upon the coronation stone, the coronation, the oath of allegiance, the oath of the tenure of allegiance to God here on earth, based upon the king's ability to be able to now come into the possession if it does not go into the possession of the king as a result of that age or that not be able to accept the tenure as a result of the age, it falls into what we call inquisition post-mortem, which we call exceedment. It exceeds to the crown. Okay? That crown is God, the everlasting throne. Okay? The throne in heaven and the throne on earth. Very important. Is there any questions? Are there any questions? Let's go into the examples of the coronation stones. Coronation stone. A coronation stone which has taken part in the ceremony of the monarch's coronation. These stones were primarily used in medieval Europe. Did you hear that? Medieval Europe, but historical examples exist throughout the world. Stones believed to have been used as coronation stones still exist, but public figures and historians argue about their authenticity and use today. Some are considered by historians to have been invented in early modern periods. So we have some fakes out there, brothers and sisters. All right, we do have fakes out there. Let's see which ones are the fakes. Okay. Let's see which ones are the fakes. We have the coronation stone of the kings of Wessex, the kings of the English. All right, this goes into the unification of the Heptarchy, which are the seven kingdoms, which was unified by Alfred the Great. Okay, whose great great grandson was Alcelton. Okay, noble stone, hence that word stone. Okay, Asherton means noble stone. Okay. Then you have the kings of Tara, high kings of Ireland. And then you have what they call the stone of scone or the stone of destiny. Okay. Which is where the Scottish kings get their divine coronation story coming from. And this goes back to the kingdom of Alba or the kingdom of Albion. Okay, once again, the kingdom of Alba or the kingdom of Albion. The kingdom of Alba goes to Kenneth McAlpine, and the kingdom of Albion goes back to kingdom of King Edward the People because he was emperor of Albion. Okay, we're going to prove it again today. So there's two coronation stones: the coronation stone for the kings of the Wessex, and the coronation stone for the kings of the Scots. We're not concerned about Ireland. Okay, so let's look at the coronation stone of the Anglo-Saxons. Now we know the Stonehenge were built longer than the pyramids in Egypt, brothers and sisters. Hope y'all know that. Coronation stone of Kingston. The coronation stone is an ancient sarsen stone block which is believed to have been the site of the coronation of seven Anglo-Saxon kings, as is currently located next to the Guildhall in Kingston upon Thames, England. Kingston is now a town in Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames in Greater London. If you look at the image here, you see the word Edwig, Edred. All these are the children of uh, um, uh, the kings of Wessex, Alfred the Great, Edward the Elder, Asherton, Edmund the First. Edmund the First was the father of Edred. He was also the father of Edward, as well as the father of our Jesus Christ, becoming the reincarnation of King Edgar. The first coronation ceremony went back to, as they just said. Okay, very important. But we're just concerned about the material that the coronation stones was used in regards to the coronation ceremony. And before the Lord. Read my screen. Bear with me. Coronation stone. Coronation stone is the ancient Sarsen stone block, which is believed to have been the site of seven Anglo-Saxon kings and currently located next to Guildhall. Coronation stone is the ancient Sarsen stone block, which is believed to have been the site of the coronation of seven Anglo-Saxon kings. It is currently located next to the Guildhall in Kingston upon Thames, England, and Kingston is now a town and royal borough of Kingston upon Thames in Greater London. Toponym. The Old English tungdom or dome meant farmstead or settlement, so the name Kingston appears to mean farmstead of the kings. You hear that? Farmsteads of the king. A local legend that the Saxon coronation gave Kingston its name is contradicted by the record of 838. History of the coronation stone. Ashton was consecrated king of Kingston in 925, Edred in 946, Ethelred the Unready in 979. There also was some evidence of Edward the Elder, Edward the First, Edwig, Edward the Martyr, which were consecrated in the town. So these are all the kings of Wessex, brothers and sisters. Our family, our genealogy, our ancestors who preserved our birthright, okay? To be bestowed upon the next appointed king chosen by the ancestors, chosen by the heirs, chosen by the descendants, okay? The blood, the Anglo-Saxon people. We must understand the traits, all right? You're going to understand about it today. What is Sarsen? Let's look at that. What is the stone? Human use for the stone. The builders of Stonehenge used these stones for the hillstone and Sarsen circles upright. Adbury and many other megalithic monuments in southern England are also built with Sarsen stone. So we see that the Sarsen stones, the stones with the coronation of the kings of England, was the stone used by the humans going back to the Neolithic time, building megalithic structures. Okay, they wasn't living in straw huts or building uh, uh, um, domains built out of trees. Okay, we understood how to build how to use the earth. Why? Because we were the founders of the earth. Okay, the inheritors of the earth. We must understand the line and sequence that I'm going with this. All right. So we see the Sarsen stone, which was the coronation stone that the kings of England used. Okay. The kings of Wessex used. Okay. We know that because it said Alfred the Great. Okay. Alfred the Great unified. Where did that at? Where did it go? Right. So we see the coronation stone was used by the kings of Wessex. Okay. The English kings, nobody else. All right. The English kings. And this coronation stone goes all the way up to the time before Edward the Confessor. I mean, yeah, Edward the Confessor. Okay. That's very important. Edward the Confessor, because when we get to Edward the Confessor, we get into Edward the Edgar Atherland, we get into Margaret of Wessex, which was called Margaret of Scotland because of her marriage to Malcolm III. This all gets into the story of how when we read Deuteronomy 17:8 through 18, we talked about don't choose a foreign king who's not your kindred, because that's what they did. They chose a foreign king that was not their kindred, because hell, the colonists wasn't kindred them damn selves. Okay, we know that. We can go right to the Constitution of New Jersey and clear this picture out. Let's do that. Let's go to the Constitution of New Jersey and make this picture clear. In lieu of Deuteronomy 17, verse 8 through 9, 19. New Jersey's Constitution. You're talking about the divine right of kings, y'all. They did mention King James, didn't they? Look at the preamble. Watch how your king bring it home. The Constitution or the Charter, okay? The lifeline for the colonists, for the states, their citizens, their officials, their officers. All of it is a result of a revolution. A revolution is a violation of the law, or a revolution is without law. Okay? So it's a violation of law. Whether it exists today, from its founding, it's a violation of the law. Let's see. It says, whereas all constitutional authority ever possessed by the kings of Great Britain over these colonies, the kings of Great Britain, calling themselves kings by way of divine right of kings because they claimed that they were appointed by God. Okay? Apparently, they wasn't reading English, because if they were, they would be English kings. These kings we're reading about in Great Britain was established by a result of the Parliament of Great Britain. Okay? The Parliament of Great Britain. And it was not because of the unification or the Acts of Union or the Treaty of Union in 1606 and 1706 and 1707. It's based on a prior engagement. Okay? A lot of you have no clue about these prior engagements, agendas that hunt the very history of the founding fathers. Okay? Let's see. Whereas all constitutional authority ever possessed by the kings of Great Britain over these colonies or their other dominions, this is called a radical title or um, jure regalia. Jure regalia or radical title is authority that the kings will have over overseas possessions. So it says, by the kings of Britain over these colonies or their other dominions was by compact derived from what? The people. The colonists are not the people. Okay? The people are the English because the colonists were ones ruling the colonies, okay? And the colonies were the ones who immigrated and migrated the land based upon a promise of some other guy who claimed to be king. And we know who that king was. King James, all those kings from the House of Stuart, all those kings from the House of Tudors, Queen Elizabeth, King Henry VII, King Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth I. All these were foreign de facto kings, sitting on the King of England. All right? How we know it? Let's prove it. It said, I'm going to read this all over. Whereas all the constitutional authority ever possessed by the kings of Great Britain over these colonies or their other dominions was by compact derived from the people and held of them for the common interest of the whole society allegiance. You hear that word? The whole society allegiance and protection are in the nature of things reciprocal ties, each equally dependent upon the other and liable to be dissolved by the other being refused or withdrawn. And whereas King George III, King of Great Britain, has refused protection to the good people of these colonies. They ain't talking about the true inhabitants of that land, but they're talking about the people of those colonies who are allowed to immigrate to those colonies, wherever group you're associated with. In particular, we're talking about East Jersey and West Jersey, okay? So we're talking about William Penn, we're talking about the Quakers, we're talking about the Dutch, we're talking about all these people who have a rich history of overthrowing land that don't belong to them, okay? So it says and whereas King George III, King of Great Britain, has refused protection to the good people of these colonies and by assenting to sundry acts of the British Parliament. You hear that? It didn't say the English Parliament, it said sundry acts of the British Parliament attempting to subject them to the absolute dominion of that body, and has also made war upon them in the most cruel and unnatural manner, for no other cause than asserting their just rights, all civil authority under him is necessarily at an end, and the dissolution of government in each colony has consequently taken place. So it wasn't a break between the Kingdom of England and the English Parliament. It's a break between the kings of Britain and the British Parliament. Very, very important to understand that. And the British Parliament was established in 1235. The English Parliament was established in 1215 by who? John, the one who signed the Magna Carta. Okay, very important. So as we can see, that the United States or the colonies did not break away from the Kingdom of England. They broke away from the British Parliament and the Kingdom of Great Britain. If everyone agrees with what I just said, could I get a thumbs up in the chat? And make sure you're still alive. Let's bring this bring this even further clearer. Let's go to Embry versus Mars to clear this up. We're going to go down to 20. Thank you, Brother Thomas from the House of Thomas. Embry versus Mars, 1950 Supreme Court case, still applicable as a result of the 1947 Constitution. This case involves um, the nominees for the Progressive Party general election in 1949. Okay, and all this results in an argument about an oath of allegiance. This whole case is about violations of an oath of allegiance in chapter 21, 22, 24, and 25. Okay, I'm just going to touch on this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to touch on it. back to the top. From the very top, it goes in on it. All right here. It says the issues to be decided here are of fundamental importance. First, because they involve construction of two sections of our new Constitution, and secondly, because they concern oaths to which it has been said no country can subsist a 12 months where an oath is not thought binding for one of it must necessarily dissolve society. So go further down. The importance of an oath in judicial proceedings cannot be overestimated. All in light of Deuteronomy 17:8 to what? 18. All right. In regards to proving that you got the right to this inheritance. Why? Because the king gave it to you. Why? Because the king got it from God. And God makes kings. It's called the divine right of kings. Okay. But that king who said upon the rule amongst you or above you better be of your ancestors, because 9 times out of 10, if he's not your ancestors, he's not going to be your king. All right. The importance of oaths in judicial proceedings, because remember, the kings govern all three branches: executive, legislative, judicial. The king's bench is called the king's court. Is called the king's bench. The king's, let's say, it's called king and parliament. The king executive is called king and his council. Okay, you must understand the language. The importance of oaths to judicial proceedings cannot be overestimated. The judge on the bench, the jury in the box, the attorney at the counsel table, the witness on the stand, the court stenographer taking a record of the proceedings, and even the bailiff when they retire to guard the jury in a deliberation are all sworn to do their respective duties before they are permitted to act. The responsibilities of members of the legislature and other state officers are certainly of no less importance to the public welfare. It's about to get deep, y'all. And watch how slick these judges are when they make these dissents. It says, an oath of allegiance, an oath of allegiance was first prescribed in the state of New Jersey, September 19, 1776, but 3 months after the adoption of our first constitution, which said, and I'll quote, I, A.B. do sincerely profess and swear, profess and swear, or if one of the people called Quakers affirm that I do and will bear true faith and allegiance to the government established in the state under the authority of the people, so help me God. And that was to King George III. They left this out of this case. While let's go to the actual edit in Patterson. Princeton, September 1776. So you got to watch these judges because some of the judges are corrupt. That's why you got the right to appeal. You got the right to petition because you have to exhaust your remedies. Just don't bow down, okay? Don't just get mad and throw the place up. Exhaust your remedy. Princeton, September 19, 1776, whereas it is essentially necessary for the safety of the state that every person who holds any office or post of the public nature should in, should invest his fidelity and attachment to the government from whence he derives protection, and under which he is authorized to act. And whereas to effect this important purpose, it is necessary that a proper test be established to be taken by all officers, civil and military, within the state. It's called the Test Act. And be established to be taken by all officers, civil and military, within the state, and that the governor or commander in chief be authorized by the law to administer such tests and the official and other necessary oaths in the several counties thereof. Section 1, therefore, be enacted by the Council General Assembly of the state that the following tests should be taken by all officers, civil and military, who are now in the office or hereafter should be appointed, elected, or commissioned within the several counties of the said state of this state. That is to say, IAB to sincerely profess and swear, or if one of the people called Quakers affirm that I do not hold myself bound to bear an allegiance to King of Great Britain, so help me God. Okay? I and be to surely profess and swear, or if one of the people called Quakers affirm that I do and will bear true and faithful allegiance to the government established in the state under the authority of the people, so help me God. Which the oath of affirmation should be affirmed by a person or a person who should be duly authorized and tendered the same by the commander in chief of the state. So they said that I do not hold myself bound to bear allegiance to the King of Great Britain. This was an overthrow. This is a revolution. It's violation of law. Therefore, you can be found guilty of treason. Okay? Why? Because let's go back and see what Embrace versus Marsh said and see if it said the same thing. It says, I sincerely profess and swear, or if one of the people called quick confirm that I do and will bear true faith and allegiance to the government established in the state under the authority of the people, so help me God. All right. So they have now swear allegiance to the government of the state and not the government of England. Why? Because they were at war. They were at a revolution. Why? Because they didn't like what British Parliament was doing. They loved what English was doing, and they wasn't even English because they was living off the virtues of the English people. All right. The only thing that the English people was missing was the English king. They had a foreigner king, but we weren't supposed to choose those kings. We were not supposed to support those kings or anybody who came after those kings. We were supposed to support our own. Okay? Very, very, very important. Why? See what else the case says. The precise language with the omission of the clause in parentheses, i.e., Quakers, which provided for elsewhere, has been carried forward through the successive revision of the compilation into the revised statute 1937 41:1 1. That is a New Jersey revised statute. Now, before we go there, let's see why they did this because the case law said so. All right. They didn't take allegiance to what? King of Great Britain. They took allegiance to the state, which was supposed to be a temporary allegiance because the Constitution said under Article 23 that it was a temporary departure until a reconciliation with the crown of Great Britain. Not the king of Great Britain, but the crown of Great Britain, because those kings who were sitting on the king of Great Britain, i.e., the king of England and Scotland, as a result of the unification in 1215 and 1235, which we discussed in a second. None of you have no clue about that, all right? Go a little further. New Jersey Revised Statute 41, colon 1 1, which is still present, right here. Every person, every person, every person who or shall be required by law to give assurance of fidelity and attachment to the government of the state to take the following oath of allegiance. Okay, I do solemnly swear and affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the government established in the United States and in this state, under the authority of the people, and will defend them against all enemies, foreign and domestic, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I do not believe in, or that I do not believe in, advocate or advise use of force or violent or other unlawful, unconstitutional means to overthrow or make any changes in the government established in the United States or in the states or in the or in the state, and that I am not a member or an affiliated with any organization, association, party group, or a combination of persons which approves, advocates, advises, or practices the use of force or violence or other unlawful or unconstitutional means to overthrow or to make any change in either of the governments so established, and that I am not bound by any allegiance to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty whatsoever, so help me God. So this is the oath they took based upon a government that was established during the time of a revolution called a revolutionary republic. So if you call your stuff a republic, it's rooted in a revolution, and revolution is an act in violation of the law or an act without law itself. I'm not saying it. This case says it. All right. Let's see. Here. Okay. I hope everyone can see this. Because if you saying you're a part of this government, then you are part of that revolution that's still going on today. All right. And it's unlawful. A revolution, as I understand it, and as you should understand it, all right? Not everybody, just the English should understand. Revolution, as I understand it, as you should understand it, or the term, is a political act or an act done in violation of the law or without law. Can anyone agree to that? Can anyone agree to that? Because apparently people are confused about the state of affairs this government is in. Okay? A revolution, as we should understand the term, is a political act or an act done in violation of a law or without the law. Now, didn't they just say that they would promise not to overthrow the government? They said they was not going to overthrow a government. How can you say that and take an oath of allegiance to that under revised statute 4041:1-1, under revised statute mentioned in this case? How can you say that when the very revolution that you did was a result of an overthrow of the political government that was already in place, which was a violation of that political law? Why? Because it was outside of the law. The act is a political one and is not to be confused with ordinary misdemeanors or felonies. You hear that? So coming in a court of law with this argument has some weight. Such an act to be revolutionary accordingly must be done either first in violation of the law, that is, of the Constitution, or of the customary or statute law, including the term law, the letter, together with its necessary implication, or secondly, without the law, by which is meant that the act must rest, for it is warranted on an abstract consideration. Such physical power, necessity, or natural equity, and not upon the authority of the existing social order to which it is restricted or hostile. Does that make sense to anyone who's right before me today? Does that make sense? Brother Thomas, Brother Murphy, Countess Jones, does this make sense? All right? So we know a revolution is outside of the law and is an overthrow of the law and is not authorized by the law. Okay? Very, 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 very important that you understand this. All right? Why? Because what they're about to say now. I have spoken of revolution in rather abstract terms, but a revolution today is unlike a revolution in the sense in which I have spoken. It is much easier in our day to start a revolution than to end one. It's much easier to succumb by surprise to a dictatorship than to get rid of it. When a revolutionary or dictate, pardon, so I'm speaking too fast. When a revolutionary or dictatorial regime, which can be assumed to be familiar with the techniques of a coup d'etat, makes every effort to maintain itself in power and to defend itself by all the modern arms of which the state today disposes, it will be astounding if a revolt or a counter-revolution will ever break out. Guess what, brothers and sisters? It's about to. Why? Let's see. So it says, therefore, I am of a firm opinion that true allegiance to our established system of government negates the right any against the right any citizen or person to attempt to also abolish the form of our government by the use of force or violence or other unconstitutional or unlawful means. And I understand the word unlawful to mean any violation of the constitutional limitation, and as synonymous with unconstitutional. A little further. Now, this is very important, right? Because Chisholm in Georgia is a case that deals with the right to petition. It defines it mentions King Edward the First, and it also mentions um, uh, Corporation Soul. It breaks down a lot that I'm using at my disposal in regards to the appeal. So it says, I do not understand how a democratic government may endure if its citizens are not in such position of mind and circumstances as to be able truthfully to subscribe to such an oath if required. I do not understand why a good citizen should, if required, hesitate to subscribe to such an oath. The view expressed above defines sovereignty to which the allegiance of a citizen of the state due is in accord with the decision of Chisholm versus Georgia. I need to read that case. The oath of allegiance of the people of this colony of New Jersey to the King of Great Britain is found in Chapter 105, Allison Law, 1776. 1776. I agree with the majority as to the vice of an oath as an invasion of the freedom of consciousness and expression in religion. I do not agree that the vices inherited therein are authority for the exclusive nature of the one oath incorporated in our Constitution, nor do I agree that this oath was given any real force by Article 21 of the Constitution of 1776, adopted July 2nd, 1776, and declared through the Declaration of Independence, adopted July 4th, 1776. So they're talking about the oath in regard to the King of Great Britain, which did not entail an oath of allegiance as we see in September 9th, 1776, allegiance in regard to the Quaker, because what? They chose sides. You know, the Quakers go back to William Penn. William Penn goes back to Charles I. Charles I goes back to King James. King James goes back to Elizabeth I. She go back to the House of Tudors, Henry the Seventh, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Okay, from either right here. This is the upsetting part. From either of these dates, the oath to the British Crown was without efficiency because ours became a revolutionary government insofar as the allegiance to the British government was concerned. Did you hear that? From either of these dates, the oath to the British Crown was without efficiency efficacy, if different, efficacy, because ours became a revolutionary government insofar as the allegiance to the British government was concerned. So the allegiance to the British government was dissolved as a result of the concerns that the colonists had with the British government, because the British government was not like the government that was here prior to the British invasion here in what they call England. now known as North America. All right. So the revolutionary government that was established now that you have now called a republic was based upon concerns that resulted from a revolt in the British government that came by way of taking over of the English government back in 1235, which we're going to go into now. All right. So thank you all for being diligent with me. We're really about to go into some history now. Okay. We're really about to go into some history. Let's see it. Right. So, oh yeah, I know where I want to go. Why is this important? Because we just read the video when we started out about the origins of oath. All right. The origins of coronation are relative to what? The divine rights of kings. Okay. The divine rights of kings. Now, what kings do they mention in this case besides King George the First? Let's see before I move forward. Right. Okay. Again, this is how you bring the heat. The history of parliamentary oath and religious disabilities began in 1562 with the statutes of Elizabeth the First, which require every member of the House of Commons to take an oath of supremacy to swear that the Queen is the only supreme governor of this realm, as well as spiritual as in the temporal causes, and that no foreign person or potentate has any authority, ecclesiastical or spiritual, within this realm. We're talking about the divine rights of kings and queens, brothers and sisters, whether they de facto or de jure. In this case, they are de facto. Elizabeth the First was de facto. King James was de facto. Charles II was de facto. King George was de facto. Why? Because they were not of royal lineage. I'm going to prove it. The history begins with Elizabeth I, which required that an oath be taken. They mentioned King James I and Charles II. All right. I don't need to read no more. So we understand that they're talking about gods on earth. All right. Since we got that covered, let's now go here. Parliament of the United Kingdom. Because they talked about the Parliament, and they just talked about the Parliament of Queen Elizabeth, right? And that involves the Parliament of England. So let's look at the Parliament of England and the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Two separate parliaments. Louise, Safari, you retract your message. I was just actually reading your message. Yeah, they were all de facto kings. And they were de facto based upon what I'm about to show you now. So when we say de facto kings, when we're talking about Charles the First, Charles II, William, Queen Anne, all those were de facto kings. Why? Because the unification of England and Scotland didn't come to exist until 1707. All right, through the Acts of Union and the Treaty of Union. But British Parliament and the English Parliament was unified way before that. All right, as a result of conflicts that originated through the time of the Plantagenet and Scottish Wars. Okay, we're going to talk about that right now. Let's see. Parliament of England. There's a difference. Yes, you're right. Even Charles, not just after him, but before him, they were invalid. Every king from Scotland was invalid. They were not English kings. Let's prove it. That's what we're about to go into the argument now. Okay, Luce Sapphire. You said Charles Stewart is the true Christ. All right, that's your opinion, but I'm gonna let you hold that opinion until I disqualify it now. So please stay with us so that you can learn a little bit too as well. Okay, because we know Charles Stewart or any Charles from the Stewart family resulted from the English Civil War or the Glorious Revolution, which resulted from the Supremacy Act of Queen Elizabeth I and King Henry VII, okay, and King Henry VIII, 1534 and 1558 and 1562, which were cases mentioned in Embray versus Mars about the oath of allegiance that the Protestants would take to Queen Elizabeth and all the monarchs that proceeded after her. Okay, well, pay attention. There's your grandfather. He said, no, these are my grandfathers. You know better. Okay, so just fall back and let me just go through my lesson. And then if you see something that need clarity or you got a question, please do. But please be show some decor. I'm not trying to disrespect your grandfather. We're talking about ancestry. So just pay close attention to the lesson. Hopefully, if you got a question, please post the question. I'll answer some questions for you if you want to. All right, so we can have some clarity, not just for you, but for myself as well. I'm glad you got eight descendants. That's good to hear. But let me get on with the lesson, okay? Don't block her any my moderators. Let her continue. But let me just go on with my lesson. All right, because you said, and I repeat, Charles the Stewart is the true Christ. No, these are my grandfather. I knew better. I descend from the lineage of kings. All right, I appreciate that. I never said you did. You're right. Let's just go through it, okay? So let me go through it. All right, let's go. Parliament of England. We're gonna go to both parliaments, Parliament of England and the Parliament of Scotland. Because the Parliament of Scotland is what you call the Parliament of Great Britain, or the Parliament of the Kingdom of Great Britain, or the Parliament of the United Kingdom. Same parliament. Because the Parliament of England was a legislature of the Kingdom of England from the 13th century until 1707. So when you say from the 13th century to 1707, you're talking about from the time of the Plantagenet King John, King John. Parliament evolved from a great council of bishops and peers that advised the English monarchs, not Scottish monarchs, but the English monarchs. The Grand Council was first called Parliament during the reign of Henry III. Henry III is a son of John. By this time, kings required Parliament's consent to levy taxes. Okay, this is very important for us to understand. Okay, including you, Mr. Sapphire. All right. Great Britain, prior to the 13th century, did not have been influenced by the Parliament of Great Britain, known as Scotland, because Scotland and England, and as well as Ireland, had separate realms as well as separate body of politics at the particular time. This is why we have to understand it, because if you don't understand it between the Parliament of England and the Parliament of United Kingdom, you will be confused. So we see that the Parliament of England started at this time of John, 1215, the Magna Carta, the War of the Barons, first and second, well, then, I understand. I'm not down you, Mr. Sapphire. Just let me do my lesson. You don't have to impress me. I believe you. All right. So, Department of England. Now let's look at the Department of United Kingdom. Department of United Kingdom. Let's look at this. This is very important because we know United Kingdom or what's called, United Kingdom came around 1801, 1803. Okay, but we're talking about the Parliament of Great Britain before it became the Kingdom of Great Britain. The Kingdom of Great Britain didn't come to the Treaty of Union of 1707 through the Acts of Union of 1706. So it's very, 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 very important. English is, in fact, a corporation. You're absolutely right. It's a corporation sole versus corporation aggregate. Senator versus Georgia clear that up. A corporation sole is the king and the tenure of the monarch, called the crown. crown of England, not the crown of Scotland, not the crown of Ireland. They're separate crowns. So it says the Parliament of Great Britain was formed in September 7th following the ratification of the Treaty of Union by the Act of Union passed by the Parliament of England, established in 1215, and the Parliament of Scotland in 1235. This is very, very, very important. So it means that the Parliament of Scotland, King James, Charles I, Charles II, none of them are in the picture right now. Can we agree with that, Mr. Sapphire? None of them are in the picture, but we're still talking about a Parliament of Scotland in 1235. Parliament of England and the Parliament of Scotland of 1235. This is very, very, very important. All right. This was a conflict between Alexander II, the King of Alba. Okay. This is a conflict between Alexander II and Henry III. Henry III and Alexander II. So let's go to the Treaty of York. Because when it said the Parliament of Scotland and the Parliament of England in 1215 and 1235 was a conflict between Scotland and England, which goes back to the Scottish War of Independence in 1295 against the Plantagenet King Edward I, our descendants, the kings of England. Not the kings of Scotland, but the kings of England. So let's go to the Treaty of York to visit the conflict that originated before King James even came into the picture, Charles I, etc., because they were not kings of England, they were kings of Scotland at that time called kings of Alba, because Alba is a corruption of the word Albion, which we'll go to in a second. So let's look up the Treaty of York. Treaty of York, my brothers and sisters. And Mrs. Sapphire, the crown you're talking about is the scone of stone. This is where all the Scottish kings take their coronation from. All right, it's not the same coronation stone that we have, because the coronation stone or the stone to stone, or what they call Jacob Pillow, was history going through what we call British Israelism, which assumed that they are the Israelites, which they are in fact not. So if you stick with me, you will see. Everyone be polite in regards to callers, usurpers, etc. This platform is for learning. So when we say King James was a usurper, and people have descendants, then they could be offended by that. And our job is not to defame anybody's religious belief. Okay. Understanding what happened between King James, his ancestors, descendants, is very important for enlightenment, but it's not used to defame anyone because that's a violation of the law. So the Treaty of York was an agreement between the kings, Henry III of England and Alexander II of Scotland, signed in York on September 25th, 1237. This is the time when the Scottish Parliament was created. Okay, before the Scottish King James even came in the picture, because the reason why this happened is a result of what was going on at the time of what we call the War of the Roses, the 100-Year Wars. Thank you, Mr. Sapphire. I'm glad you're not. We need tough skin in this business. All right. That's one of my archbishops. We do have some shows on here, so forgive us. We're glad you're here, and we hope that you continue to stay with us for this lively information. So we see the Treaty of York was an agreement between King Henry III. King Henry III was of the Plantagenet King John, son of Henry II, son of Godfrey, the fifth Count of Anjou, son of Fulk, ruler of Jerusalem. The Treaty of York was the agreement between King Henry II of England and Alexander II of Scotland, signed at York on the 25th of September 1237, which affirmed that Northumberland, which at the time also encompasses county of Durham, Cumberland, and Westmoreland, were subject to English sovereignty. They established the Anglo-Scottish border and formed the remains almost unchanged to modern times. The only modification had been regarding the debatable land and Berwick upon Tweeds. Let's see. All right. So this is very important to understand that there was a conflict between Scotland and England. This goes back to what resulted in what they call um, uh, the War of Scottish Independence with Edward the First. With Edward the First. Now let's see that, because we see that when we get to the history of Alexander of Scotland, he was one of the kings of Scotland at that time called the Kingdom of Alba. Okay, the kingdom of Alba. Very, very, very important to understand that. So Alexander of Scotland. Let's look at Alexander of Scotland. Alexander of Scotland was the son of Malcolm III, my brothers and sisters. Alexander II was the son of Malcolm III. Did you know that, Mr. Sapphire? Did you know that? Alexander II, nicknamed the Peaceful by modern historians, just like King Edgar the Peaceful, our king, was king of Alba, Scotland from 1214 until his death. He concluded the Treaty of York, which defines the boundary between England and Scotland, largely unchanged today. We're talking about Alexander II in the 13th century, okay? This all involves what we call the Parliament of Scotland. The Parliament of Scotland, where the Parliament of England was already in existence still. Why? Because the Parliament of England goes back to Alfred the Great, okay? Go back to Alfred the Great when he unified the Kingdom of England. Matter of fact, let's prove it. Alexander II father was who? Malcolm III. Pardon yourself. No, that wasn't, let me get it right. Alexander II the third spouse was Joanne of England. That's it. Spouse was Joanne of England. Joanne of England was the daughter of Edward the First. Okay, let's make that clear. Let's look at Joanne of England. Oh, pardon myself, not Edward, John. Joanne of England was Queen of Alba from 1221 to her death as the wife of Alexander II. She was the third child of John, King of England, and Isabella of Aquitaine. This goes into the Albigensian Crusade. Okay, it goes to the Albigensian Crusade. This all involves the bloodline of Jesus Christ. Okay, it's involved the bloodline of Jesus Christ. I did a marvelous lecture on that. Mr. Sapphire, you need to check that out. All right. So Joanne of England was the daughter of John, the son of Henry II, the son of Godfrey, the fifth count of Anjou, the ruler of Jerusalem, the one who was brought Jerusalem and all the crusades to its height. Okay, when we watch the movie Kingdom of Heaven, it tell you all about Folk the Fifth, King of Jerusalem. All right. Folk the Fifth, King of Jerusalem, goes back to the history dealing with Malcolm the Third's wife, um, um, Margaret of Scotland or Margaret of Wessex, because they're married into the Plantagenet kings. As a result of Matilda of Scotland married to Folk, Godfrey the Fifth Count of Anjou, who was the son of Folk the Fifth, King of Jerusalem, where my surname Jefferson descend down from. So I'm not just saying that, I'm going to show it. All right, let's see. Let's go back one. All right, so Alexander was king of Alba. I know that. I know that based on allegory. I know that. So he was king of Alba. So we deal with kings of Alba. We're talking about Alba, which is also another name for Britain or Great Britain. Okay, so let's go back to Alexander's descendants, going back to the origin of Alba, which was also started by uh, Kenneth McAlpine. Okay, Kenneth McAlpine. Let's look at that real quick. All right, Alexander II, Kingdom of Alba, and we're not talking about Albion. Okay, because the Parliament of Scotland started in 1235. The Kingdom of Alba, which was known for a name from Scotland, goes all the way back to Kenneth McAlpine, which we'll go to right now. Alba, Kingdom of Alba. Okay, Kingdom of Alba. Now we just mentioned Alexander II. All right, and we're gonna go into the history dealing with him. The period between the ascension of King Duncan I and the death of Alexander I of Scotland, all right, was the last before the coming of the Normans to Scotland. In some respect, the reign of King Malcolm III prefigures the changes which took place in the reign of the French-speaking King David I and William I, although native reactions to the manner of Duncan II essentially perhaps put these changes back somewhat. So we see that Alexander I and Malcolm III are related. This is very, 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 very important. We ain't gonna talk about that right now because we're talking about the kingdom of Alba. Okay, the kingdom of Alba goes back to what this guy called the kingdom of Alba was the kingdom of Scotland between the death of Donald II in 900 and Alexander III in 1286. The latter death led indirectly to an invasion of Scotland by Edward I of England in 1296 in the First War of Scottish independence. You got to get into what we call the uh what's it called it'll come to it. So the kingdom of Albert was the kingdom of Scotland between the deaths of Donald and Alexander III. The latter death led to indirectly to an invasion of Scotland by Edward I. Edward I was of the Plantagenet crown. This is very important to understand that. All right, of the Plantagenet crown. Okay, here we go. So, kingdom of Alba. When we deal with the kingdom of Alba was denominated by Picts, and Celtics. Picts and Celtics were actually one and the same. Okay, that goes back to the stone of Scone. Okay, the stone of Scone. Let's look at that real quick because all this is connected. The stone of Scone is the coronation stone. Okay, the stone of Scone is the coronation stone. Let's look at that. The stone of Scone or the stone of destiny, or also called the Kratanas, I can't pronounce that. It's an oblong block of red sandstone that was used in the coronation of Scottish monarchs until the 13th century and thereafter in the coronation of English and later British monarchs. Very, very, very important to understand that. The artifact was originally kept at now-day ruined Scone Abbey in Scone near Perth in 1296. The forces of Edward I of England captured it during the invasion of Scotland. The stone has subsequently been used in the coronation of English monarchs and British monarchs for over 500 years. Not the same coronation stone that were used by the English, because the coronation stone that they used for Scottish monarch was actually known as the chair of Edward I or the chair of Edward the Confessor. All right, and they all go back to Margaret of Wessex, who was married once again to Malcolm III. All right, very, very important because I'm gonna talk about him in a second. Right here. All right, right here. Various theories and legends exist about the stone's history prior to its placement in Scone. One story concerns Fergus, son of Eric, the first king of Scots in Scotland, who transported the stone from Ireland to Argyll when he was crowned on it, and it was recorded in the 15th century chronicle. This is very, very, very important because who is Fergus? Who is this guy? Let's look at it. Who is this guy? Also kings of Scotland. Okay, right here. Fergus Fergus the Great was a possible king of Dalritia and was the son of Eric Dalritia. While his historicity may be debatable, his post postmosis, pardon if I pronounced that word wrong, postmosis, post, posthumous importance as to the founder of Scotland is the national myth of medieval and Renaissance Scotland, and it is not in doubt. Rulers of Scotland from Stenoch McAlpine until the present time claim descent from Fergus of course. So when they say Kenneth McAlpine, they're talking about Kenneth McAlpine. So the founders of the Stone of Scone, which were the kings of Scotland, or the kings of Great Britain, or the kings of Alba, not Albion, all right, all associated with a national myth relative to those claiming to be the descendant of the children of Israelite, to what they call the origin of British Israelism, okay? And they said the rulers of Scotland from Senech Alpine until the present day clan descended from Fergus Moore. So who is Kenneth Alpine? Let's look at that real quick to connect the dots. Posthumous. Thank you, Miss Sapphire. Posthumous. Posthumous. Thank you. Kenneth Alpine, or Kenneth the First, was king of Dalmatia and king of the Picts, okay, of likely Gaelic origin. According to the traditional account, he inherited the throne of Dalmatia from his father, Alpine MacDoch, founder of the Alpine dynasty. Kenneth I conquered the kingdom of the Picts in 843 and 850 and began the campaign to seize all of Scotland and assimilated the Picts, for which he was posthumous posthumous nickname the Conqueror. Okay, very important. Let's go down a little further. So we see Fergus the Great and Kings Alpine are all related. They're kings of Scotland, kings of Great Britain, or kings of Alba, or the kingdom of Alba. This is very important because they're going to attach themselves to Malcolm III. How I know it? Because he the one did their recording. Okay? He the one did the recording of these kings. Let's see. I know who these people are. According to the genealogy, so we're talking about genealogy, talking about genetics, talking about ancestry, talking about birthright, we're talking about uh, uh, citizenship. Okay, we're talking about the right to be on a piece of land based upon God appointing the king to convey the land to the king to convey to the heirs or descendants. It's called library of season. This practice was not a feudal practice. Okay, it was not a result of feudalism. According to the genealogy of the Scottish kings, Kenneth's father was Alpine MacAldach, the king of Dalmatia, which existed in what is now Western Scotland. Alpin is considered to be the grandson of Alfin, a descendant of Sindal the Goldblum, who ruled in Dalmatia. The synchronism of the Irish kings lists Alpine among the kings of Scotland. Modern historians are skeptical about the reign of Alpin in Dalmatia and his relationship with Ayat, and believe this misconception is a result of negligence on the part of the scribes in some texts. Post Husmus. Thank you, Mr. Southfire. The genealogy of the kings of Scotland and Dalmatia dates back to the original manuscript that was written during the reign of Malcolm III in the mid 11th century. So all the history going back to Kenneth MacAlpine, Alexander II, Alexander the First, going all the way back to these Scottish kings, going all the way back to what they call Alba or the Kingdom of Alba. All this was not recorded to the mid late century under Malcolm III. Malcolm III, the Scottish king, the king of Alba. Okay, who is Malcolm III? This is very important because we're connecting the dots. Once again, we know that British Parliament and the English Parliament are two separate parliaments because the Parliament in England didn't start before 15, and the Scottish Parliament didn't start till 1235 under Kenneth, under Alexander II. Okay, very important. Alexander II. Malcolm III. Hold that thought, everyone. All right, this is the connection. All right, this is where the connection between the kings of Wessex, all going back to Alfred the Great, and it ends with Edward the Confessor. After Edward the Confessor gets out the picture by way of the Battle of Hastings, now you get into William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror brought in Norman French language. This is why Edward the First passed the Penal Act when he declared that all languages from this point on at his time be spoken in English so that the English would know what's being said to them in a court of law as prescribed by Deuteronomy 17:8 through 19. Malcolm III was king of Alba from 1058 to 1093. Very, very important. His later nickname was called Ken Moore. All right. Big head, understood as Great Chief. Malcolm's long reign of 35 years preceded the beginning of the Scottish Norman. You hear that? Scoto Norman. So the Scoto and the Normans are in fact related. They didn't say Anglo Norman. They didn't say Anglo Norman or Anglo French. It says Scottish Norman age. Henry the First of England, which is the son of William the Conqueror, and William the Conqueror invaded England, and Eugene III, Count of Boulogne, were his sons-in-law, making him the maternal grandfather of Empress Matilda, William Allen, Matilda the First, Countess of Boulogne. This goes to the history in regards to what we call the anarchy or the white ship, where William Allen died, and as a result of that, Empress Matilda had to marry Godfrey the Fifth Count of Anjou, son of Folk, ruler of Jerusalem. She was called Empress Maud. Okay, very important. So Malcolm III was married to who? Margaret of Wessex. Who is Margaret of Wessex or Margaret of Scotland, which is called Saint Margaret of Scotland? This is very, very important. Saint Margaret of Scotland, also known as Margaret of Wessex, was Queen of Alba from 1070 to 1093 as a result of his wife, King Malcolm III. As the wife of King Malcolm III. Margaret was sometimes called the Pearl of Scotland. You hear that? A king of Wessex, the Pearl of Scotland. All right. She was a member of the House of Wessex and was born in the Kingdom of Hungary to the expatriate English Prince Edward the Exile. She and her family returned to England in 1057 following the death of Harold Godwinson, the Danish king, at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. His brother Edgar Excellent was elected as King of England, but never crowned. After the families fled north, Margaret married Malcolm III in Scotland by the end of in 1070. This is where they got the name Edgar, Edmund, Ethelred. All these names were named as a result of the names given coming down from the kings of Wessex, King Edgar the Peaceful, Ethelred the Unready, Edmund the First. All these kings were the names given to Scottish kings as a result of the marriage between Malcolm III and Margaret of Wessex, or we call the Pearl of Scotland, or Margaret of Scotland. Okay, very, very, very important. Her sons, Edmund, Ethelred, Edgar, Alexander, David, Matilda. All these were names, and their religion was Catholicism. Okay, their religion was Catholicism, so there was a conflict, and this is why the church had to be revived through what we call the English Reform through King Edgar the Peaceful in 959. Very important to understand that, which I'm going to show you in a second. Matter of fact, let me show you now. All right. So we see Malcolm III and Margaret of Scotland had children and named them after English descendants. Okay, Alexander II, and we know Alexander II was the founder of the Parliament of the United Kingdom was brought about a treaty of York with Henry III, the son of John, the son of Henry II, son of Godfrey, fifth Count of Anjou, the son of Folk, the ruler of Jerusalem. All this is very, very, very important. Why am I saying this? Let's go here. Right here. Let's go to King Edgar. I am the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful. King Edgar means rich in spirits, which means rich in descendants. Yeah. King Edgar, the peaceful. King Edgar Jefferson, because Jefferson means peaceful place. Let me bring this on home to you now. Let me bring this full circle. King Edgar the peaceful. Now, I've done classes in prior lessons that cover the totality of what it is that I'm giving you a brief on. Okay, King Edgar the Peaceful, or the King of Peace. Okay, Edgar means rich in spirit. That's called what we call patrilineal descent. Okay, father's side. Edgar was king of England from 959 until his death in 975. He became king of all England, and his brother Edwig, he was the younger son of Edmund I. All these is where Malcolm III married to Malcolm, Margaret of Wessex or Margaret of Scotland. They got their name from. Why? Because they were tying into the family. Okay, this is why when we got to the War of the Roses and the Hundred Year Wars, Henry VIII takes over as a result of conquest and then appoints the Scottish king by way of what we call the Supremacy Act, as well as the divine right of kings, which is nothing more based upon the oath of coronation. Okay, and they all took an oath of coronation to King Edgar the Peaceful, and King Edgar was king of Albion before he even got the name Alba. Okay, Atherton called himself. Matter of fact, let's just look at it right now. Since we covered Alba, let's cover Albion. Oh, I'm about to get into that. You said you descend from Jacob. I'm about to touch on that right now. I'm glad you said that, Mr. Sapphire. I'm about to touch on that right now. Just give me a second. Right. Albion, the land where the giants. In 930, the English king Atherton used the title Rex ex Sirius, meaning Totis Albanius Regne, king in chief of the whole realm of Albion. His nephew, King Edgar the Peaceful, styled himself 970 Totis Albanius Imperator Augustus, means August, emperor of all Albion. Now, this is very important because we have Albion and we have Alba. Okay, we know Alba goes back to Kingsman Alpine. Okay, we know they all was recorded at the time of Malcolm III, who was married to a Wessex king. All right, Margaret of Wessex or Margaret of Scotland. They were all, she was descendant of these kings. King Edgar the Peaceful, who was descendant of Atherton, the great grandson of Alfred the Great, who unified all the barbarian, which are Berber kings. And this is where the giants were. Okay, so it's very important to understand that at the time of 930, Atherton styled himself, and Edgar the Peaceful in 970 styled himself as emperors of Albion. Why is this important? Because when we go back to King Edgar the Peaceful, while King Edgar is ruling himself as king of Albion, he's being invaded by the kings of Alba, Kinsman Alpine. He's been invaded by Kinsman Alpine, where he's already considered king of Albion. Let's look at it. And they were giants then in Albion. Let's look at it. Look at the picture. There's a black dude right there, right there, dark skinned. There's another light skinned one, fair skinned one, but they are both giants. Okay, very important to not overlook that. This gets into what we call the kings of Great Britain. Okay, look at the kings of Great Britain. You look at the MS roll 100, 1600, and it clearly shows you that all of those kings were dark skinned, for the lack of a better term, black. Okay, so we see Ashton and King Edgar the Peaceful styled themselves as the kings of Albion. All right, you can only have one king, either the kings of Albion are ruling or the kings of Alba are ruling. So let's see which is the juror or which one is the de facto king. Let's go right here. With King Edgar the Peaceful. Now, it's mighty strange. Jesus was the king of peace because when Jesus came on earth, wasn't no wars, wasn't nothing going on. He had a peaceful reign, whether this was myth or whether it was folklore, it's now become true and concrete because I am the reincarnation of this king right here. He looks just like me. He don't look like that one over there when I had my locks. Looks just like me. Let's go to the proof of foreign invasions. There you go, another picture of checkerboard, exchequer. All right, I know all this history. Coming to my closing. Here. Warfare and foreign relations. Now, Mr. Sapphire, you said your short sentence is descended from Jacob. I'm gonna touch on that right now. All right. I didn't write this. Now you said you got tough skin. We need that today, so you can probably clear up some of this this uh, we can clear this story up and show how it's supposed to be told as a result of who is the jure king and who are the de facto kings, who are the rulers of Alba or who are the rulers of Albion, because they all go back to giants, because only the giants can build Stonehenge, and the Stonehenge was the same stone built for the coronation of the kings of England before you got to the Stone of Scone, and the Stone of Scone goes all the way back to what? Kenneth McAlpine. Let's see. Peter Rex observed in his biography of Edgar that his reign was remarkable for the lack of opposition to his rule, both from within and outside his kingdom. Although no Vikings attacks on England are recorded in his reign, there were several battles fought by ealdormen and neighboring kings. Listen, in 966, Thored, son of Gunnar, ravaged Westmoreland, perhaps as part of the English resistance to the southward expansion of Strathclyde, and King Kenneth Scotland conducted raids on Northumbria in early 970. Now, all the Northumbria came under the rule of King Edgar the Peaceful, but yet he's being invaded by King Kenneth of Scotland. Who is King Kenneth of Scotland? King of Scotland. Let's look at him again. Kings of Scotland. All right. Kenneth of Scotland was the king of Alba from 971 to 955. The son of Malcolm I, he succeeded King Culian in a later death in the hands of Roderick at the fall of 971. So as you can see, Miss Sapphire, that it was the Scottish kings who invaded England and started living off the virtues of the English king based upon the coronation that goes back into the coronation stone, which you call the Stone of Scone. And this results because of their perception of them claiming to be the children of Jacob, which is nothing more than what we call British Israelism, British Israelism, and I'll touch on that right now. Early records expression. Accordingly to Brackney in 2012 and finds, the French Huguenot magistrate M. Le Loyal, the 10 Lost Tribe, published in 1590, provided one of the earliest expressions of the belief that Anglo-Saxons, Celts, i.e. Picts, Scandinavian, and Germanic and associated people are the direct descendants of the Old Testament Israelites. Anglo-Israelism has also been attributed to King James, the sixth of Scotland and the first of England. Now that's mighty strange that he called himself Anglo-Israelites when he was a Scottish king. Does that make sense to me, to you, Mrs. Sapphire? You said England is a corporation, not a country. Can't invade a corporation. Yes, you can. Let me show you. Matter of fact, let me stay on point. I'll close that on that. British Israelism. Let's go a little further. I can do it better with the stone of stone. All right, stone of stone. Let's go ahead. You said you were developed. You were related to Jacob. All right, that's what you said. All right, this is symbolic of Jacob's pillow. Now we know Fergus, son of Eric, said he brought the stone of stone to Scotland and Scone of Perth, and we know that their stories, Kenneth Alpine, Fergus, son of Eric, and all the other ones are not qualified until the writings of Malcolm III, who was in fact married to an English king. So let's not lose that fact. All right. It says the island of Jesse is one of the island of Jesse is one of the traditional names of Ireland. Other legends place the origin of the stone in biblical time and identify it as the stone of Jacob, taken by Jacob from Bethel while on the way to Haran. The same stone of Jacob was then supposedly taken to the ancient Ireland by the prophet Jeremiah. Okay, I did a great class on that. Contradicting these legends, geologists have proved that the stone taken by Edward I of England to Westminster is a lower old red sandstone, which was quarried in the vicinity of Scone. Doubts over the authenticity of the stone in Westminster exists. A blog post by retired Scottish academic and writer of historical fictional Marie McPherson shows that the date dates back to at least 200 years. Let's go a little further. Westminster Abbey. In 1296, during the First Scottish War of Independence, Edward I of England took the stone as spoils of war and removed it in Westminster Abbey, where it was fitted into a wooden chair known as the coronation chair on the King Edward's chair, on which most subsequent English and then British sovereigns have been crowned. You hear that? Edward sought to claim the status of Lord Paramount of Scotland with the right to oversee King, because we know he should have had the right to, because as of what King Edward, his past ancestor, King Edward the Peaceful, did. All those Scottish, Frankish, Nordic descendants were subject to the King of Peace, King Edgar the Peaceful. Very, 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 very important to understand that. All right. So, yes, the crown was usurped. And I'll close on that. The crown was usurped. Let's look at the crown. Now, I want to address your question. This is Sapphire. You said England is a corporation, not a country. You can't invade a corporation. Once again, you said England. You said the original parts of the land. England is a corporation, not the country. Can't invade a corporation. All right, let's look at this real quick. You too far up, Mr. Sapphire, in time to have a concrete story. But I mean, you have the right to identify with your story, but time never was when we were not. For life of time began, the time will come when will be no more. I always say, he who writes your books set your timeline. And time never was when we were not. For life of time began, the time will come when will be no more. So we can't let King James, we can't let Charles the First, Charles the Second, Queen Anne, or any Scottish king for that matter, tell our story as English people. You have your story, we have ours. And our best storyteller writer is the one our ancestors, as said in Deuteronomy 17, 8 through 9. So in closing, the crown is a political concept used in Commonwealth realms, depending on the context. It generally refers to the entirety of the state, or in federal realms, the relevant level of government in that state. The executive government specifically, or only to the monarch, the direct representative. This would mean corporation sole. The term can be used to refer to the rule of law or the function of the executive, legislative, or crown in parliament, or judicial crown in the bench, or the king's bench, which governs in the civil services. The concept of crown, the concept of crown as a corporation sole developed first in England as the separation of the physical crown and the property of the kingdom from the person and personal property of the monarch. It spread through English and then later British colonization. I hope that makes sense to you. Corporation sole. So you didn't get it until we had it. Corporation sole. What is this? Corporation sole is a legal entity consisting of a single sole incorporated office occupied by a single sole natural person. This structure allows corporations, often religious corporations or commonwealth governments, to pass without interruption from one office holder to the next, giving positions legal continuity with subsequent office holders having identical powers and possessions to their predecessors. The corporation sole is of two types: corporation sole and corporation aggregate. This is called the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings. How I know that? Because if you go to the concept of the crown or the corporation sole, it's based upon crown land. You ever heard of the term crown land? Let's look that up before I close out. Crown land. We don't use words loosely here. We don't talk loose here. Everything is backed up. Chittim versus Georgia clearly points this out. Now I'm using Wikipedia. Crown. So if King James or any of the descendants or the House of Tudors or any of their descendants were were divinely inspired by God to be God on earth as the king on earth, as said in Deuteronomy 17, 8 through 18, all right, then they must be able to do this in regards to returning the land back to the king as well as reverting the land to the heirs by way of conveyance. It's called library of season. Library of season. Crown land, also known as royal domain, is a territory area belonging to the monarch who personifies the crown, incorporates the crown, or incarnates the crown. We don't use those loose terms. We say incorporate. It is equivalent of a intel estate and passes with the monarchy being inseparable from it today. Today it's called Commonwealth realms, or i.e. public land or public domain. This is very, very, very important to understand if you claim that you have an inheritance on this land from the one who's going to be appointed by way of a crown through a form of coronation, through a form of ceremonial, not just put some just not to have some type of uh, regalia, such as a hat, scepter, etc., but the one who is doing the work, the one who's actually putting down the work in these courtrooms. That's the one who's going to prevail. And with that, let's go ahead. Library of Caesar. Library of Caesar is an archaic legal conveyance ceremony formerly practiced through feudal England. Even before that, it was there. It was there at the time of the kings of Wessex, going back to Ashton, because his name is mentioned in the actual conveyance. It says the term library is closely related to the word or synonymous with the term delivery. It didn't say take. It didn't say steal. It didn't say borrow. It said delivery used in some jurisdiction and contract law, especially related to what we call deeds. There's only two type ways land can be conveyed, by deed and by law. The oldest form was the law, i.e. the common law, provided that a valid conveyance of a feudal tenure and land required a physical transfer by the transferor to the transferee and the presence of a witness through what we call the twig and turf ceremony, which is through library of law and library of season, two ways. Now, Deuteronomy 17:8-9 was through this way, library of deed. Library of deed, I'm parts of library of law. Library of law is whereby the parties went within sight of the land and that the transfer declared to the recipient that possession was being given, followed by the recipient entering onto that land. You see that because the law was the Bible was written in English, and the English is based upon the English common law. Then you had the way to solidify the conveyance, which is by library of deed, which is going down to that county recorder office and file that on that record to prove that in case anyone contested. This is called quieting a title. All right. The cloud on the title. This is what you're talking about. Jesus coming back on the clouds. Revelations. Library of deeds whereby the parties met together on the land and transferred symbolically delivered possession of the land by handing over a twig and clump of earth to the recipient. Okay. So if you're the recipient, then you better be an heir to the intel estate, because the only way you can get it is by the ceremonial dealing with heirs. And that ceremonial language is this: the lucky new commoner goes to his given acre, i.e., parcel of state, and cuts a turf from the selected site and drops 2 shillings in to the whole maid. The high steward of the county, called shire or hundred, then twitches him with a twig and sticks the twig in the turf, then hands it to him, saying, "This turf and twig I give to thee as free of Asherton gave to me, and a hope and loving brother thou will be." So if you ain't related to Asherton, you have a big problem. Because who was Asherton? And I'll close on this. Asherton, noble stone. All right, noble stone. We can talk physics. We can talk metaphysics, gases, ether. We can do all that. I understand that because we only have an experience in space and time. We didn't come from this space because we're not composed of what we call space, i.e., matter. All right, we're composed of what we call antimatter. So in order to get back to antimatter, we must disqualify this matter, which you call mass or matter, i.e., the things we see with the physical eyes. All right. He was the son of Edward the Elder and his first wife, Ecgwin. Modern historians regard him as the first king of England, one of the greatest Anglo-Saxon kings. He never married and no children. He was succeeded by his half-brother, Edwin the First, the father of Edward, and King Edgar the Peaceful, which is our Jesus Christ, who on the reincarnation of the day as the King of Peace. And with that, I'll digress. I'll leave the floor open for comments if there are any. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Once again, I'm going to give honor for everyone who joined me today, as well as Mr. Sapphire. Thank you for your intellect as well as your dialogue. I hope that this website, as well as the information on this website, i.e., the English Church, is soothing to your soul, and and with always in, instilled with instructions to bring you to the right path, the path from the right and the wrong, the wicked and the true. With that, I'm going to say peace. I'm still waiting for any questions. If anybody have any questions? Like, share, subscribe, free and common focus. Also, one more thing I want to show Mr. Sapphire. 46 Condu, that's 9. The same thing you see is the same thing right here in the statute. Every person to whom you use or use of any real estate within the state, having been sold, given, limited, granted, released, or conveyed by deed, grant, or any other legal conveyance whatsoever, or that you hereafter be granted by any deed or conveyance whatsoever, and his heirs and assignees shall be held to be in full and ample possession of such real estate, to all intent, construction, and purposes, as such person, his heirs and assignees were possessed thereof by solemn lottery of season in possession. Any uses custom to the contrary is by means notwithstanding. Yes, I agree with you based upon the inheritance that was left by the British monarchs. And I hope that you receive everything that was divinely or spiritually prepared for you as well as what's prepared for us. So once again, I really thank you for showing up today, Mr. Sapphire. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Once again, thank you for your decor. Please pass the information on. I'm open to doing open dialogues as well as YouTube if you have anybody who would like to sit down and break bread. And with that, I love you all. Um, it's time to unify, brothers and sisters. All right? It's time to unify. And with that, the King of Peace says peace.